How's it going, everybody? My name is Max, and this is the Republic of Philosophy. Today, I'm going to be reading some Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. This is the Miller edition, published by Oxford. Very, very good edition, sort of like the industry standard. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to be reading this book. I'm inspired by Gregory B. Sadler's work to actually read Hegel's text. And it's a daunting text. And I've tried to get into it before, but as we will soon find out, Hegel can be hard to read, to say the least. So, feel free, if you're in college, if you're studying Hegel, feel free to get a copy of this book. Not too expensive, and read along. There's so much in this. And if you're interested in any form of modern philosophy, Hegel is your man. He really brings German idealism to its zenith, and the rational enlightenment that we live in today is really based on a lot of Hegel's work. So here we go. We're going to start with the preface on scientific cognition. This is immediately after the contents, and we'll see how many we get done today. Preface on scientific cognition. It is customary to preface a work with an explanation of the author's aim, why he wrote the book, and the relationship in which he believes it to stand to earlier or contemporary treatises on the same subject. In the case of a philosophical work, however, such an explanation seems not only superfluous, but in view of the nature of the subject matter, even inappropriate and misleading. For whatever might appropriately be said about philosophy in a preface, say a historical statement of the main drift and point of view, the general content and results, a string of random assertions and assurances about truth, none of this can be accepted as the way in which to expound philosophical truth. Also, since philosophy moves essentially in the element of universality, which includes within itself the particular, it might seem that here, more than in any other of the sciences, the subject matter itself, and even in its complete nature, were expressed in the aim, and the final results, the exclusion being, by contrast, really the unessential factor. On the other hand, in the ordinary view of anatomy, for instance, say the knowledge of parts of the body regarded as inanimate, we are quite sure that we do not as yet possess the subject matter itself, the content of this science, but must in addition exert ourselves to know the particulars. Further, in the case of such an aggregate of information, which has no right to bear in the name of science, an opening talk about aim and other such generalities is usually conducted in the same historical and uncomprehending way in which the content itself, these nerves, muscles, is spoken of. In the case of philosophy, on the other hand, this would give rise to the incongruity that, along with the employment of such a method, its inability to grasp the truth would also be demonstrated. So that's aphorism 1. Aphorism 2. Furthermore, the very attempt to define how philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with drags in an extraneous concern, and what is really important for the cognition of the truth is obscured. The more conventional opinion gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either expected or contradicted, and hence it finds only acceptance or rejection. It does not comprehend the diversity of philosophical systems as the progressive unfolding of truth, but rather sees in it simple disagreements. The bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, They also supplant one another as mutually incompatible. Yet at the same time, their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary as the other. And this mutual necessity alone constitutes the life of the whole. But he who rejects a philosophical system, i.e., the new philosopher, does not usually comprehend what he is doing in this way. And he who grasps the contradiction between them, i.e., the historian of philosophy, does not, as a general rule, know how to free it from its one-sidedness or maintain it in its freedom by recognizing the reciprocality, necessary moments that take shape as a conflict and seeming incompatibility. Aphorism 3. Demanding and supplying these superficial explanations passes readily enough as a concern with what is essential. Where could the inner meaning of a philosophical work find fuller expression than in its aims and results? And how could these be more exactly known than by distinguishing them from everything else the age brings forth in this sphere? Yet when this activity is taken for more than the mere beginnings of cognition, when it is allowed to pass for actual cognition, then it should be reckoned as no more than a device for evading the real issue. Die Sache selbst, a way of creating an impression of hard work and a serious commitment to the problem while actually sparing oneself both. For the real issue is not exhausted by stating it as an aim, but by carrying it out. Nor is the result the actual whole, but rather the result together with the process through which it came about. The aim by itself is a lifeless universal, just as the guiding tendency is a mere drive that as yet lacks actual existence. And the bare result is the corpse which has left the guiding tendency behind it. Similarly, the specific difference of a thing is rather its limit. It is where the thing stops, where it is what the thing is not. This concern with aim or result, with differentiating and passing judgment on various thinkers, is therefore an earlier task than it might seem, easier task than it might seem. For instead of getting involved in the issue, this kind of activity is always a way beyond it, instead of tarrying with it and losing itself in it. This kind of knowing is forever grasping at something new. It remains essentially preoccupied with itself instead of being preoccupied with the real issue and surrendering to it. To judge a thing that has substance and solid worth is quite easy. To comprehend it is much harder. And to blend judgment and comprehension in a definitive description is the hardest thing of all. Culture. Aphorism 4. Culture and its laborious emergence from the immediacy of substantial life must always begin by getting acquainted with general principles and points of view, so as at first to work up to a general conception, Gedanke, of the real issue, as well as learning to support and refute the general conception with reason, then to apprehend the rich and concrete abundance of life by differential classification, and finally to give accurate instruction and pass serious judgment upon it. From its very beginning, culture must leave room for the earnestness of life in its concrete riches. This leads the way to an experience of the real issue, and even when the real issue has been penetrated to its depths by serious speculative effort, this kind of knowing and judging will still retain its appropriate place in ordinary conversation. Aphorism 5. The true shape in which truth exists can only be the scientific system of such truth. To help bring philosophy closer to the form of science, to the goal where it can lay aside the title love of knowing and actual knowing, that is what I have set myself to do. The inner necessity that knowing should be science lies in its nature, and only the systematic exposition of philosophy itself provides it. But the external necessity so far as it is grasped in a general way, setting aside accidental matters of personal motivation, is the same as the inner, or in other words, it lies in the shape in which time sets forth the sequential existence of its moments. To show that now is the time for philosophy to be raised to the status of science would therefore be the only true justification of any effort that has this aim, for to do so would demonstrate the necessity of the aim, would indeed at the same time be the accomplishing of it. So that's it. I've read 5 aphorisms in the preface of the Phenomenology. There's some very important passages in that time. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be uploading more of these passages next time. I'll be moving on to 6. And yeah, feel free to read along. And if you have any questions, any thoughts of what went on in this passage, feel free to leave a comment. Take care.